Well, at long last, at Forces Sport, we finally managed to catch up with Sarah Bonar. She is wearing 3 rugby hats.
Yeah.
Harlequins,
Not quite today, no hats today, but
the Royal Air Force, and of course a Scotland international. Well, and when you were a wee lassie back home in Scotland, did you ever think that you would wear the colours of your nation in rugby?
No, probably not. I came to the sport quite late. I had always ambition to be fair, represent my country, but always Olympic ambition. I'd been a swimmer, a rower, so it was always in GB colours. And then when I finally turned my hand to rugby, I was like, okay, let's go for Scotland. Let's represent my nation.
So when did the switch happen from swimming to rowing to finally rugby?
So swimming was just as a kid, like even when you kind of are 10 years old and you have signs that you could be good, you're in every day, twice a day, which just got a little bit too much. But I started rowing just the back end of GCSEs into college through Tall and Talented programme that UK Sport had run.
tall and talented.
Tall and talented.
I love that.
Yeah.
You can bring a height up.
Well, that rules us both out on both fronts.
We were never approached for that one.
Small and not talented programme, that's where we're from.
Sorry,
Yeah,
so
so-
tall and talented.
Yeah,
brilliant.
UK Sport. I don't know if they still do, but they run like talent ID programs, I guess, in line with the Olympiads, to try and recruit athletes that might be good at sports that
Totally
they've
makes sense.
identified.
Just I didn't realise it was so obvious.
Yeah.
Tall and
So
talented.
did they look at your physical attributes and then sort of divvy you up into rowing, or
Yeah.
how did that work?
I don't really know how they selected the sports, but they identified that, look, let's recruit some rowers. I think it was rowing and basketball. And so I went along to these trials. They have your height, your arm span, they get you doing different aerobic tests, agility tests. And I made it through the stage and they're like, we think you'd be great at rowing. So I was like, this is amazing. I can go to the Olympics, represent GB. And to be fair, I really enjoyed it. I had some fantastic experiences, represented GB at juniors under 23, involved in the camps and things. But just really struggled with how individual it was. Missed being in team sports, played netball growing up. And the early mornings, 5 a.m, you're doing a 12k paddle in winter conditions. You've got to love it. And I was going to camps and everyone around me was really enjoying it. And I was like, why am I miserable? I'm usually quite a happy, upbeat person. And I was fortunate enough at college, despite being a rower, I had Danielle Waterman, ex-England international. She was coaching at the time alongside her playing career and took me on as a little bit of a mentor because I struggled with my nerves and I didn't know how to compete internationally. It was also new. And I bumped into her whilst I was at Loughborough Uni, still rowing. She was on England camp and just ended up breaking down, being like, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm so miserable. I still want to be competitive at something.
This was still in the rowing?
This was still in the rowing, yeah. And it was Nolly that said, look, you'd be great at rugby. You're always friends with rugby girls. Your personality would fit the sport. We sometimes did some rugby training and crossover, the rowers and rugby girls would change sessions and things. She was like, you'd be great at it, just give it a go. So put me in touch with some rugby clubs, Lichfield, and I took a break from rowing initially and actually never looked back. The training was so diverse, loved the team environment. At my first session I rocked up in a pair of trainers and the girls were like, you'll need some studs. What size are you? And they just gave me a pair of studs, but in rowing if you needed kit that would be like, oh well, you need to sort yourself out. It's just very different feel and yeah, I loved it.
Of course, it was when you were at Lichfield that you met another member of the Harlequins and Royal Air Force rugby fraternity, Amy Cockayne.
Yeah, Amy, we go way back. Yeah, great girl. She's helped me out so much over the years. But yeah, lovely that she's my teammate for Quins and also RAF. I love it.
But was she a large influence in moving you into the RAF? Was that sort of an influence as well?
Yeah, massively. So I'd always had a military itch. My dad and granddad were both serving in the army, but she definitely was a big influence in that. I was teaching at the time. I never really wanted to take a step back from international commitments to do my officer training, but Amy was like, look, for the sake of 6 months to a year, it will be worth it, you'll have a great career, and they're really supportive of sport. get on it and do it. So yeah, Amy and her dad Ian, like I owe a lot to.
Well, look, we'll get back to the sporting part of you in a moment, but I'm just interested in the career choice because you've gone for Royal Air Force Police. Why was that?
Same as Amy as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, same as Amy. So I was teaching before, really like working with people. And again, the police largely works with people, but is a very diverse role. So I've got like the law enforcement side of things, but also the RAF have protective security, whether that's in cyber, whether that's counterintelligence. It's such a diverse, interesting branch, but also probably gives you that buzz that you get from playing rugby. And I know that I'm not going to be playing rugby for, it's obviously got a shelf life. Touch wood, I get a long shelf life and I don't have a career-ending injury, but at some point that's not going to be my life, and I wanted a career that is going to give me that fix as close to rugby as I can get, and the Provost branch, I believe, will do that.
And of course, going through training as you were at Cranwell, again, there was, I don't want to say a clash, but you had to be ultra organised because you were also representing Scotland at a crucial time in their build-up to the World Cup qualifying campaign. How on earth did you manage to marry up the two?
So I got to thank the Royal Air Force for being so supportive with it. So I managed to get through phase 1 at Cranwell, graduated, and then moved straight down to Portsmouth for phase 2. And it was here that I had the kind of clash with phase 2 training and World Cup qualification. But like, I can't thank DSPG and the Commandant for allowing me to fly out, especially during a pandemic. We had to pretty much put in secure measures to make sure that I was just staying within the 2 bubbles, and yeah, the support from Scotland as well to back me and support me enough to come in late and help with the qualification.
It's amazing news that Scotland have qualified for the Women's Rugby World Cup, but you're sort of given, you know, the sort of double hat you were wearing at the time, having to do your training as well. But it wasn't the ideal trip out to that final qualifying match either. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, actually had a roller coaster of a time. So managed to get back from injury, was looking really good. Our pre-training camp in Edinburgh, again playing really well, getting back into it, feeling strong, and then flying out there, managed to get a positive PCR when I landed in Dubai, so sadly spent most of the time in a hotel room, but thankfully got out for the game, so I was able to bring ultimate hype, run water, and see the girls do the job, finish the job anyway.
Well, you'll be joining them later on in the World Cup campaign in New Zealand. But if I can just rewind you slightly, what is it like, your first cap for Scotland? What is running through your mind, your body? What sort of emotions are flooding through you?
First cap, nerve-wracking. I remember, to be fair, I still get this to the day on an international. I get so nervous to the point I even question why I play sometimes. I've had a couple of conversations with the girls in the squad, and I'm not the only one in this. Just feel really nauseous for most of the day. And then once that kick-off whistle goes, you're fine. You're like, this is why I play, this is great. But first cap, I was probably more nervous for the first cap song that they make you do on the bus on the way home. At the time, as like quite a young, inexperienced player, the senior girls on the team were quite intimidating, and I remember thinking, I'm more stressed about singing in front of the girls in management. It's Shania Twain, Man, I Feel Like a Woman.
What is the song?
In front of the girls and actually playing. But my first cap was the part of, one of the first games for the World Cup qualifying tournament in Ireland 2016, I think it was. Sadly, we lost, so it was actually really nice to then be a part of the World Cup qualifying tournament 4 years later and qualify.
It's a nice insight into the team bonding that goes on within the Scotland camp. Is there anything else that you can reveal amongst friends?
Team bonding, do you know what? Scotland, we are like a really tight-knit group. We are like a big family, and I think from speaking to other girls that are involved in other nations, I don't know whether it is as tight. For example, like our jersey presentation have now been moved to the day of the game because it used to be the night before, and we'd all get really emotional. But just it means so much to us.
So they're using that power for the day of the game.
Yeah, kind of just tweaked it a little bit, or else we'd be emotional and ready for the game
the day before.
The day before, like a little bit too soon. But no, like honestly, like rugby, I don't think there's any sport quite like it that you have your teammates' backs as much as you do, because I guess you effectively put your body on the line for each other, and whether it's Quins, Scotland, RAF, like the tight knit of the team is something that I haven't felt in other sports.
It was interesting, that synergy that you touch on there with rugby and bonding, very similar to the military, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Like, you go on deployments with your team effectively for months at a time, and you are essentially going to take a bullet for that person when push comes to shove it if you get in that opportunity. And yeah, it is a very similar feeling. You spend a lot of time with each other away from home. Both can be quite physical. There is a lot of crossover.
And I'm hopeful that that sort of emotional moment you had when you were going, transitioning from rowing, and when you found that rugby was, I'm hoping now that that's gone, that you've answered your question, how we started the conversation, that rugby is where you found your home. You don't have any of those doubts anymore. You're not miserable. You are loving it. I'm assuming that's all boxes are ticked. So to speak.
Yeah, massively. Yeah, definitely the right decision. Loving it. Quins have been great. They've been a huge support for me this season, and again, Scotland, RAF, like the family that I'm now a part of in that wider rugby community. Like, I love it. I wouldn't change that for the world.
Slightly blinded by the glare of Kath's white trainers, but you moved to Harlequins this year, this season, this campaign, and of course there are a number of Forces athletes here as well. So were you welcomed with open arms? I know Amy's here from the RAF, but there's a number of Army athletes here as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, me and Amy got better chat than any of the Army girls, so
get that in there.
Absolutely fine. Army girls haven't got a leg to stand on. But yeah, no, we have good banter, so to speak, with Beth, the Army representative, and Jade as well. But no, it's great. It's all light-hearted. At the end of the day, when we put on a shirt for Quins, we've got each other's backs, and then enemies on the day that we play Army.
And with Quins winning their title last year for the first time in the Prem 15s, did you feel any pressure coming in?
Yeah, you know that any game that you play, the opposition are going to be playing against the title winners, and they bring their A game. But it's a pressure that's exciting to play with and deal with, and I think just makes you a better player, because every team's bringing their best game to play you because they want to beat the championship winner. So I'm enjoying it. It's good. There's
been an explosion of women's rugby, or certainly the interest in women's rugby over the past few years. What would you put that down to?
I think growing in exposure and increasing exposure, whether that's the games being streamed on iPlayer now or BBC sometimes, social media, bigger presence, and I think just realising that actually the women's game is pretty decent. And I think it's very easy for maybe male supporters or non-rugby supporters to say, oh well, the women's game is not as physical as the men's game. Well, it is in its own way. You can't directly compare the two. We're not all 122 kilos running at each other. The ball's generally in play a little bit longer in the women's game, which makes it more exciting. But the skill sets, I don't think there's too much difference in them, and I think with time it'll just increase in following.
And this is like an ongoing argument, I say the same to people. I was like, you can't really treat them as the same game, because you're, as a female athlete, are putting in 110% just like the male athletes. So it doesn't matter that it's not physical. It matters that you guys are putting in just as much training, just as much heart, putting your body on the line just as much as they are. It's just that, in time it's been, the women's game might be slightly behind now, but you can't question your abilities and your love and sort of passion. You can't, well, that is comparable because it's exactly the same as the men's game.
Yeah, definitely. And look, in the women's game, you're getting crossfield kicks, you're getting absolute flair play come in, and the hits are still physical. It's still a very physical game, but rather than being 120 kilos clashing against each other, it's like 90 kilos clashing against each other. And there's still some huge hits, like England-Scotland game coming up, Poppy Cleal's running at you, Jade Conkle running at you. It's still a war of attrition, but I think we need to kind of step away from directly comparing the two. It is slightly different, but still very exciting.
Just appreciate, your game for what it is.
Yeah.
You've had your first training camp with the Royal Air Force. Were you impressed with the standard of players down there? I know you've got, obviously there's Amy Cockayne and Lucy Nye, so were you impressed with the standard of players down there?
Yeah, definitely.
You can't say no, really, that's an unfair question.
Yeah. No, do you know what? It was great to be reunited with Ian Cockayne again, because he was my Lichfield coach. So it was really, really cool to be coached by Ian at RAF camp, and the girls were class. Like, again, it's another family, welcomed me with open arms. I was really nervous, felt like first day at school. But no, I left the camp loving it. Standard's great. Most of the girls are playing either Premiership or Champ Rugby. So again, like, it is a good standard. And I think the Army game coming up, Navy game coming up in services will be a good spectacle of the sport.
Some brutal fixtures.
Yeah.
Do you look at your calendar at the start of the season and think, oh my gosh, Harlequins, Royal Air Force, Scotland, and think, how am I going to put my body through this? How's my car going to cope with the mileage?
Yes and no. You always start thinking, whoa, it's going to be a big season, but it goes so quickly. And each week's a new week. You've got a different focus, different analysis, different things that you've got to work on. So it's never daunting. It's always exciting and just another thing to get stuck into, really.
Did you clear your diary when you knew that the Women's World Cup was going to be shifted to this year? Did you think this is the most important time for me?
Yeah, so especially for Scotland, it's been a long old slog, like 2 if not longer years sorry, in the making. We've had qualifying tournaments pushed back left, right and centre. We should have played our first qualifying match 2 years ago, I think, and with COVID and the pandemic, it just got pushed and pushed and pushed. So when things started to look a bit more firm in September we had our first qualifying tournament. We're like, right, let's do this. But I think actually the delays probably gave us that little bit more time to gel and grow as a squad, because Scotland in particular is a really young squad. I think 4 years ago it's a pretty much similar squad that then qualified 4 years later, and we were all very young, probably like a handful of caps between us all, whereas now we've just got that little bit more maturity, experience and the level head to go and be competitive at a World Cup, not just get there.
And I know we covered it to begin with, that sort of longing that I think what's driven you since you were little sounds like that desire to represent your country, whether that be with a GB vest or with a Scotland vest. You did do GB juniors, you were involved at that level with the rowing, but is there any difference between sort of representing GB and representing Scotland? Is there something really special about representing Scotland on its own rather than under a GB umbrella?
Yeah, no, there is. Scotland's a really passionate nation, and there's just something that traditionally you've always been that underdog. You've got that like fire in your belly that I can't speak for any other nation, but that I don't think you'd probably get with a GB vest. Obviously my first junior kind of cap, so to speak, with rowing was incredible, but in Scotland there's just something a little bit different. It's just passion and pride. I think it comes more so through when you're playing for your nation. Yeah, that's a really tricky question. Yeah,
I imagine it's the same, but I've never done either, so I don't know. But I think it's because I've seen that Scottish passion. I'm just thinking maybe there's just something slightly more special in a way, because and also because, say, if with Six Nations, it always gets very individual. None of us are British when it's the Six Nations.
Oh yeah, you've got your allegiance. And I think also growing up in Scotland, your history lessons, the curriculum's probably changed now, but you pretty much spent your time learning about Battle of Bannockburn, that one time that Scotland beat England. So you grow up kind of with that friendly rivalry, so to speak. But no, Six Nations is class, and representing Scotland especially, it's just a bit, it's something unique about it.
You're not at the stage where you're being recognised on the streets yet, though.
No.
That's to come, I'm sure, after World Cup triumph or something.
No.
As you mature as a person, you have more life experiences. So are you now able to draw upon any of those experiences that you've encountered with RAF training and perhaps teaching as well on the rugby pitch, or when you're in camp?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think going through military training, even teaching, you're put in some, unexpected situations that you are going to come across on the pitch. But if you flip it, actually sports probably gave me a lot of those tools and skill sets that I've been able to take back into the military or teaching my previous profession. But yeah, they definitely go hand in hand, and I think calling lineouts, for example, can be a bit heated, or you sometimes struggle to see where the space is, for example. But when I think back to some of the stressful situations that you're put in at Cranwell, you're like, okay, we haven't got live fire coming at me, like actually I'm okay, like I've got a little bit of time, I can take a few seconds to think about where I need to go or where the space is. So yeah, like both really lend themselves to one another and have definitely helped me mature as a person, both on and off the pitch.
And have you and Amy lined up against each other in international colours yet?
No, we haven't yet.
Real test for the friendship there.
Yeah, definitely. It would definitely be tasty, but I certainly prefer playing with her on the same team. I know that if anyone has any like beef with her on the pitch, I've got her back straight away, and vice versa. And we both have like quite fiery heads when we play. But
now you're going to be giving her the beef.
Yeah.
Well, she throws into the line out, and obviously as a second row, I mean, would you be able to read any of her signals? I mean, would you be able to interpret?
Amy's like a cool cucumber on the pitch. She has very little tells when she's going, and she's probably got one of like the best arrows in the women's game. She's a really tricky hooker to defend against, especially when you've got the strength and depth that England have in their pack. We work probably more off player movements rather than Amy as the hooker.
And what do you think it would mean for you pair if you made it out to New Zealand later in the year and lined up against each other in the World Cup?
Oh, that would be incredible. That would be incredible, because it would also mean that Scotland have got out of the pool stages. Do you know what? That would be amazing for both to represent the RAF on the world stage at like one of the best competitions you could be involved in, but also for our respective nations. It would just be a proud moment for the both of us, I reckon.
And going forward, do you think that this gravy train that Amy has sort of got you involved in, and getting into the RAF, I know that she's keen to use her international contacts to sort of beef up the RAF squad, or just military, not just, I know there is players in the army as well, but do you see going forward that a bit of a role of what you're doing is potentially bringing more rugby players into the RAF?
Oh, definitely. Like the skill set that rugby players can offer the military is incredible. Like it's really transferable. So I do think like even some of the Scotland girls, like the younger girls coming through, are already thinking, oh, maybe I could get into the RAF as well and
are you on a commission
career.
for the number you get in?
Tell her.
Yeah, that's true.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think we're now role models for youngsters coming through, that if they have that military itch, they can proudly serve the Queen and country in the forces and also their sport as well. The two careers go hand in hand. And I think with the women's game growing the way it is, it's getting there, but also women do need dual careers. The money's not there for us to live off, and just setting themselves up for the future when rugby does come to an end, or they decide that actually it's time to hang up the boots, they've got something to get stuck into.
I feel like we could talk to you for another half an hour, but I'm conscious of the fact that you do have to do some training, and you've also got to get dressed into a reindeer outfit or something like that. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant having you on the Forces Sport podcast, and we can't wish you enough success with Harlequins rugby, RAF rugby, Scotland in the World Cup, Scotland in the Six Nations, and everything else that's coming your way as well.
Brilliant. No, thank you.
I see us interviewing you at the end of your career as well, and I look forward to that day, end of rugby career anyway, and I look forward to that day
that's
where
at least
we
another
can...
10
it's a
years?
long way
10
off.
years?
We'll probably won't be alive by then, I don't know.
All right.
4 or 5 years we've got.
No, but I can see us interviewing you again as like the stalwart of Scotland rugby and Harlequins rugby and RAF rugby, and I look forward to that day. I look forward to watching your career as you go on anyway.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.